Well, welcome everybody. I think we shall begin. Welcome to the eighth installment of the ISCIA Seminar series, What Were We Thinking? Where in the face of ecological catastrophes, environmental problems and social issues, we attempt to cross disciplinary boundaries and have conversations that enable us to grapple with these pertinent questions that connect us all and concern us all. So in today's seminar, I'm excited to introduce and delighted to introduce Helen Douglas, who will be joining us with her talk entitled Nota Bene, Thinking in Questions. Now, if you're anything like me, you may have had to have Googled what Nota Bene actually means, and I recognize it as abbreviated to NB, which is a direct translation from Latin, means to take note or to pay attention to. So in relation to this and in the context of the seminar series, Helen remarks, and I quote, "If a time of crisis calls for a new mode of thinking, philosophical practice offers a meaningful and emancipating way to find one's own way in a troubled world." So I'm fascinated by this idea and this concept and the agency that it may actually contain. So Helen has actually published, alongside having a vast 20-year experience of philosophical counseling and consulting, she's published numerous articles, as well as the book Love and Arms, Violence and Justification in 2011. So with this vast experience, as well as her academic background in this talk, Helen's going to draw upon a range of philosophers and also touch upon aspects of her own philosophical practice, which she states does not require necessarily academic philosophy, but rather revitalizes the ancient Greek understanding of philosophy, which is that of a way of life that cultivates personal transformation and new ways of seeing the world. So without further ado, Helen, I will put the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Sorry for the headset, but the neighbors are taking some trees down, so I have chainsaws. Okay, to begin, with a note of appreciation to our hosts, to Angie and Emma and Gary, for the excellent question, which rightly puts our thinking in question, and second, for this rolling river of a seminar that carries us along together week by week to who knows where. I'm going to offer some approaches to problems without solutions, drawing on my own work and others with similar notions. I'm not using slides. The quotations are in the chat if you want to follow along. And thanks for everybody who arranged to get that document into the chat. So shall I give you a minute to do that, or I'll just carry on? What were we thinking is a moment of opportunity, a break in the continuity of our identification with the stories in our heads. Maybe a rude awakening or a crushing embarrassment, precisely a learning opportunity. Don't we love those? So already we have to make a choice. Will we seize the moment and learn to think differently? Already a possibility of freedom and a responsibility. If we are willing to learn, which means to change, and we don't know how, Donna Haraway has a good approach. We stay with the trouble. This is Donna Haraway. Staying with the trouble means making odd kin. That is, we require each other in unexpected collaborations and combinations in hot compost piles. We become with each other or not at all. End quote. The moment that has made me cringe to look back at is the ANC's 1992 policy document, Ready to Govern. Really? 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 What were we thinking? It begins with the 4 basic objectives of ANC policy: to strive for the achievement of the right of all South Africans as a whole to political and economic self-determination in a united South Africa, to overcome the legacy of inequality and injustice created by colonialism and apartheid in a swift, progressive, and principled way, to develop a sustainable economy and state infrastructure that will progressively improve the quality of life of all South Africans, and to encourage the flourishing of the feeling that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, to promote a common loyalty to and pride in the country, and to create a universal sense of freedom and security within its borders. I find that hard to read with a straight face, to not grimace, to keep the sarcasm out of my voice, something like bitterness or bitchiness. I have to tell you that preparing for this talk had me awake in the wee hours every night for weeks, grappling with many, many thoughts and ideas, lots of tears, lots of rage. Gradually, I calmed down and began to see things differently. What were they thinking in 1992, after generations of violence and resistance, preparing to lead South Africa's first legitimate government ever? Bearing in mind the ferocity of the negotiations and the violence at the time, bearing in mind that the ANC had never been a political party, had been banned for 30 years, had only existed legally in the country for 2 years. Knowing, at some level they must have known, that they would not have a free hand to conjure the country of our dreams out of thin air, nor to beat it out of economic and political structures that were designed for division, extraction, and oppression. Maybe they were thinking what they had to think, what that moment demanded, to dare to set out the architecture of a democratic South Africa, thinking what the drafters of the American Claims and the Freedom Charter had thought, what liberation movements have always thought, that the people shall govern, that liberation was possible even in our lifetimes, that there was a political road to some kind of freedom, peace, justice, shared prosperity, and we might build and travel it together. But now we say, what were we thinking? As if we indeed had been stupid, naive, mad, as if we were betrayed, lied to, taken for a ride by crooks and con men, as if we and they should have known better, should have done better, as if hope for a better life for all was a fool's game that we will never fall for again. This is not a good feeling. We desperately need somebody to blame. Anne Carson, in the preface to Grief Lessons, her translation of Euripides' Tragedies, writes, "Why does tragedy exist? Because you are full of rage. Why are you full of rage? Because you are full of grief. Ask a headhunter why he cuts off human heads. He'll say that rage impels him, and rage is born of grief. The act of severing and tossing away the victim's head enables him to throw away the anger of all his bereavements. Perhaps you think this does not apply to you, yet you recall the day your wife, driving you to your mother's funeral, turned left instead of right at the intersection, and you had to scream at her so loud other drivers turned to look. When you tore off her head and threw it out the window, they nodded, changed gears, drove away. Grief and rage. You need to contain that, to put a frame around it where it can play itself out without you or your kin having to die." End of quote. In 2010, Marxist geographer and anthropologist David Harvey concludes a lecture on the crises of capitalism by saying the current world order isn't a world he wants to live in. He doesn't have the solution, but he thinks he knows the nature of the problem, saying, quote, "We have a duty, it seems to me, those of us who are academics and seriously involved in the world, to actually change our mode of thinking," end quote. To say it is a duty suggests it is both necessary and possible, which in turn suggests that it is already available, ready to hand. But we also have a dilemma. If our current mode of thinking is the problem, then any solution we come up with will probably dig us in deeper. Also, if academics have been society's designated thinkers up to now, then academic thinking must be in question as well. So this can't be just about making a better plan. It's also about orientation, here and now, in the dark. Harvey's challenge already gives us 3 clues, though. First of all, the personal commitment of each one of us who feels and takes on that duty to stay involved and to change. Second, that we are persons who come together to answer the call. Third, that thinking has modes, so we are not stuck with the one we've got. It seems to me that philosophical practice, philosophy not as debates about texts, but as a way of life, what Pierre Hadot calls spiritual exercises, active and particular engagement with how we think in our own lives over time, can help us to stay with the trouble, with the rage and grief, to come back to ourselves, to the struggle, to live and think otherwise. It is also a practice to orient ourselves in the face of insoluble problems. The basis of my own thinking and practice is the work of Emmanuel Levinas, another philosopher who didn't have the solutions, but thought he knew where the problem lay, in ethics. Levinas believed that Western thought, by placing the self in the center of all things, tends to become totalitarian by the very fact that it ignores the radical experience of the other. In the concluding paragraphs of an essay on Jewish-Christian relations in Europe, Levinas writes of a maturity and patience for insoluble problems. Quote, "What can it be? The presence of persons before a problem, attention and vigilance, not to sleep until the end of time, perhaps. The presence of persons who, for once, do not fade into words, get lost in technical questions, freeze up into institutions or structures. The presence of persons in the full force of their irreplaceable identity, in the full force of their inevitable responsibility. A new religiosity and solidarity is loving one's neighbor anything other than this. Not the facile, spontaneous elan or enthusiasm, but the difficult working on oneself to go toward the other where he is truly other, in the radical contradiction of their alterity, that place from which, for an insufficiently mature soul, hatred flows naturally or is deduced with infallible logic. The presence of persons, proximity before persons, what will become of this new spirituality, that proximity without definite projects, that sort of vigilance without dialogue, that devoid of all definition, all thought may resemble sleep. To tell the truth, I don't know." Then he speaks about the little prince in Saint-Exupéry's novel, who demands the stranded pilot draw a lamb for him. The pilot tries and fails, and eventually satisfies the boy by drawing a box in which, he says, the little lamb lies sleeping. Levinas concludes, quote, "I do not know how to draw the solution to insoluble problems. It is still sleeping in the bottom of a box, but a box over which persons who have drawn close to each other keep watch. I have no idea other than the idea of the idea one should have, the abstract drawing of a parallelogram, cradle of our hopes. I have the idea of a possibility in which the impossible may be sleeping." This is an approach we could talk about, perhaps to take up maturity and patience, attention and vigilance, the difficult working on oneself, the presence of persons in the full force of their irreplaceable identity and inevitable responsibility. Something could happen there. We could also practice letting go of old practices in the egocentric, death-bound, reductionist, deterministic, violent logic of Western thinking. In earlier presentations, Andrea wondered if we were even willing to think, and Vulindlela Nyoni talked about the popular culture of no regrets, how it gets in the way of the kind of remorse that would actually move us to stop our nonsense. I keep remembering that dream where you're gripping a stick and suddenly it's a snake or the throat of a stranger? Before cognition or will even come into play, your hands spring apart spontaneously. Before you know it, you knew it. Or, as Hannah Arendt says, quote, every thought is an afterthought. Thought reflects experience. This is me, sorry, not Hannah. As if this movement of coming to know is a whole body, heart, mind, personal experience, and that we should be attending to the whole orchestra of our sensibilities and not just the idiot conductor. Why are we failing to think from and with our experience? Because it isn't just the climate crisis that we know perfectly well but fail to address. It is senseless violence everywhere, all day, everywhere. Starving children, domestic violence, economic violence, state violence, war we know perfectly well, and we don't stop. See, I'm getting cranky again, looking to tear somebody's head off, full of rage, full of grief, of hopelessness, impotence. Deep breath. So, how do we take our hands off the throat of the world? How do we withdraw our fake ignorance, our consent by participation, and come back to our senses? Part of doing something else has to include disengaging what we are doing now. Can't we just do that? This is where Laurie Anderson's From the Air has been keeping me company. It begins, good evening, this is your captain. We are about to attempt a crash landing. We are going down. We are all going down together. Put your hands over your eyes. Jump out of the plane. There is no pilot. You are not alone. Stand by. So imagine the plane is Western thinking and the pilot is Western man. Imagine letting it go. There is no pilot. You are not alone. Stand by. Or there is Ursula K. Le Guin's short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. It is set in a utopia, a perfectly healthy, happy city that depends for its happiness on the suffering of one child. Everyone knows it, and they are, regretfully, willing to pay that price. But every now and then, people walk away. Here's how the story ends. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into the darkness, and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist, but they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. I am speaking today from decades of my own experience of learning to think for myself and more than 20 years of supporting others to do so in a philosophical counseling practice. To a fly on a wall, philosophical counseling would look like psychotherapy, two people in conversation about what's going on for one of them, but without the medical staging of pathology, diagnosis, and treatment, without playing the disparate roles of doctor and patient, or for that matter, master and student, or service provider and consumer. It's a conversation motivated by the desire or distress of the person who comes to my door or screen, and my desire and willingness to welcome them, make myself useful, to learn from and with them, to tell them a thing or two now and then, in the course of which somehow they also learn to find their way, to come to their senses, to stay with the trouble and think for themselves. Where they get to is always a surprise, and it generally takes longer than anyone hoped. I've written about this elsewhere. The titles are in the poster for today in the quotations doc. But here's a paragraph on its philosophical nature and cultivation of virtue. This is me quoting me. This is a fundamentally philosophical scene. A person, a world, a question, an interlocutor. The careful practices of expression and self-awareness, attention to the suffering caused by unwarranted beliefs, fears, and desires. It is not doctrinal. Rather than teaching about virtue, it encourages virtue to develop. Because it takes time, it calls for patience and discipline. Because it is formidable, it calls for gentleness and courage. Because it faces the truth, it is valiant and fierce. We learn how to learn. Practical wisdom emerges as a trustworthy sense of orientation, not from principles and rules, but from the self-confidence of the human being that Marx called freedom. It is not the certainty of achieving the truth so much as the sureness of being true to oneself, true to life, and therefore dependable. So here's my wager. Maybe we don't have to despise humanity or give up on it. Maybe we're supposed to recover it, give it new substance, new life. After all, philosophical counseling is only a stand-in. The relationships are real, but the setting is arbitrary, kind of. And the work is simply what my parents' generation called building character. Mostly it seems to involve adversity, a struggle. Such character formation, development, and change is happening all the time, and this is another place where we ought to be aware, to pay attention, to conduct ourselves accordingly. Being reflectively and critically aware of our experience, reactions, and responses, of what moves us, how we shape and are shaped by each other, for better or worse. Such interdependent, interrelated arisings with all our relations, all our kin, is the source and condition of a meaningful life. Or so it seems to me. Now, when I say it's happening all the time, I mean the future. Hannah Arendt is good on this, quoting, "We don't know the future. Everybody acts into the future, and nobody knows what he is doing because the future is being done. Action is a we and not an I. Only if I were the only one could I foresee what's going to happen from what I am doing. Nobody knows what is going to happen simply because so much depends on enormous amounts of variables, that is, in other words, on simple hazard." And then the interviewer asks, but if contemporaries hold on to their deterministic modes of thinking, you think it's because they're afraid of freedom? And Hannah Arendt says, and rightly so, only they don't say it. If they did, one could immediately start a debate if they would only say it. They are afraid. They are afraid to be afraid. So I'm interested in practices and approaches in real life in which we recover our humanity and our dignity, our faces, in practices and approaches in the present, here and now, that are open to futures that are never limited by any particular thought of their possibility. I really wanted to close with some practical suggestions, but I don't know how to proceed any better than the people I've cited. I think the notion of withdrawing participation is a good one. However, that could be done, not that it will make us innocent. On the contrary, it will take up our responsibility. I'm thinking like going on strike, withdrawing our human labor from the current order and turning toward another order already of this world that has been suppressed and denied. Maybe what Levinas calls a humanism of the other. And heaven knows we need to organize towards popular, nonviolent, mass democratic movement again. And also, can we please be a little kinder to this young democracy of ours that was born into a world where democracy would be blown up by globalizing neoliberalism and IT? Really, look around. You can't blame all of this on the ANC. In the meantime, we can indeed work with whatever is available to work with in any situation, in its particulars, staying with the trouble by way of philosophical practices of working on ourselves together, working with what puts us in question, moving in the direction of freedom and more life with no assurance of a destination. Nota bene means note well, be of good cheer, be of good will, be of good faith, good work, and good hope. You.
Thank you, Helen. Wonderful. So I see that I misinterpreted what Nota Bene was meant to mean in the context of your talks. Thank you for clarifying that for me.
My meaning, my personal meaning.
I like your meaning. Helen, thank you so very much. There's an entire world of emotion and thought, I think, swimming around in my head right now in relation to what you've just said. So if you don't mind, I'll maybe have a couple of, I'll give a couple of comments or ask a couple of questions. And I'll just ask that everybody else, if they would like to ask Helen anything, raise their hand, and then I'll try and field the questions and get each one of you in the correct order. Apologies if I miss that order. Wow, yeah, there's a lot going on in there, Helen. I must say, from a personal perspective, what really is like sticking out, or really what really touched me in what you had to say there, is a strong connection between the emotional elements of experiencing the world as we know it, and the relationship that holds with the way that we think about things. And I think grappling with this idea of being afraid to be afraid, and the notion that you, one of the quotes you popped up in the chat box there, related to the idea of why do we have tragedy? Because of rage. Why do we have rage? Because of grief. For me, I think I completely underestimated, until I read and come across ecofeminisms, I underestimated my own grief and my own rage. And I found being allowed to get in contact with that, being encouraged, or being sort of having my attention drawn to the importance of those emotions and what they actually mean, and what they may indicate, or what they may point to, is something incredibly liberating. And I think that's coming through quite strongly, because you seem to have a strong sense of frustration. And I would say my number one overriding emotion in relation to seeing massive social disparity and inequality, seeing the destruction of our planet, the destruction of cultures, of lives, of people stressed and on antidepressants and anti-anxieties, like most of my friends and family, to be honest, is like this sense of absolute sorrow about it all, and frustration. So I really appreciate that you've drawn attention to the fact that this unfolding, as it is unfolding, is something that is not something that we can talk our way out of, in the sense of it's here and it's now, right? We're already responding to it. So those are just my initial thoughts. Like I said, I'm still processing. There's one last comment I'd like to say, and I'm only grabbing so much time because I see we still have half an hour. And that's the one thing that came into my mind. You mentioned action is a we and not an I, which I absolutely love. And one of the things in response to all of these deep issues that we're talking about, I find, is that it's very easy to start scolding the world and pointing fingers and assigning blame and getting caught up in the othering that entails. But someone I really respect said, I think it was Alan Watts, who said, your job is not to scold the world, but to delight it back to its senses. So in amongst everything that you've said, I sense there's a strong sense of agency in the fact that you are talking about grappling deeply and honestly and authentically with these hectic issues that we're dealing with. And I'd just like to say I really, really appreciate the authenticity of that. And I think it's long overdue. And I'll stop talking now. I don't know. You're welcome to reply if you like, and then I'll field questions.
Yeah, thanks. Just the notion of separation, how we are so cut off from, like, this belongs in this box and this belongs in this box, and they have nothing, don't look behind the curtain kind of thing. Yeah. And then if we do start to connect them, and to know that they already were connected, the practice is kind of, it's always it's always a not too tight, not too loose, not too far, not too close. And it's always kind of in motion so that you don't get completely sucked in and identified with the horror of it all. Or you're that. So it's this thing of what's helpful right now, what's necessary right now, and definitely to not let it keep you from enjoying life and the beauty of it all.
Absolutely. I do believe Gary's got his hand up. Gary.
Emma, Andrew had his hand up before me. I don't know if you saw that.
Sorry, I haven't seen it. Okay, great. Apologies. Alex, I believe. Did you say? Yeah.
No, Andrew.
Oh, Andrew. Sorry, Andrew.
That's okay. I just have a short comment. Recently, I reread Montaigne's essay on experience, and it's brilliant. He says, we only learn from personal experience. Nothing else counts. And the problem is our learning difficulty as a species comes from we are programmed to hate pain. And a lot of experience comes with pain. And most of us basically dissociate. As soon as the experience comes with pain, we don't want to feel the pain. Therefore, we cannot digest the experience. I think that's brilliant. And I think it fits into what Helen was talking about, precisely what to do about this difficulty is in the box.
Yeah, I think I remember once being at physio with some pain or other, and I said, "What actually is the use of pain?" And she said, she's not Montaigne, but she was pretty good. She said it's to keep you from doing what you're doing that's causing harm. Oh, you're muted, Emma, I think.
Just wonderful, this techno stuff. Sorry, guys. I'm not sure who's next, if it was Alex or Gary. Let's take Alex. Sorry, Gary, I'm going to shuffle you along.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Helen, for a wonderful presentation. So I come both as someone who has been involved as someone who's in an ongoing conversation with Helen for about 5 years. So I know her practice from reading and from experiencing it. And so I come as a living testimony of how she has done so much to change my life. And I'm very grateful for that. But I suppose one of the things that you've done so brilliantly in this talk, Helen, is you've given us a mode of writing philosophy that's not argument but gesture. And so in a really wonderful way, it's kind of like a blend of poetry and philosophy, which gives, I suppose, those who are philosophically minded a completely different way to express their ideas. And then the other comment is what I've noticed in my own life, and given that the emphasis on philosophical practice, part of it is keeping with the trouble so as to inspire virtue, that I've become a much better friend. And in becoming a better friend, I'm also a better stranger. And I suppose in your own practice, how have you been able to meet strangers, or have you noticed a change in the way you meet strangers who are going through very intense experiences?
It's a practice, I guess. I think there's so much that we're afraid of because we are told to be afraid of it. Don't, go out on the streets at night. Don't talk to strangers. All of this stuff, like, I'm not going to do conspiracy thinking or anything, but the messaging that we get of everything that we have to be afraid of, a lot of it is just a lie. And so the thing about hanging out, and again, it's not too close, not too tight, but if something's frightening you, it would be good to take a look at it and find out if maybe there's something that's being kept from you that might be rather interesting to encounter. And just thanks for your comment on style, because I just going into meetings with academic philosophers and grad students, and they say, but how is this philosophical, what you're doing? It just kind of breaks my heart every time. But onward we go. Thanks. Now it must be time for Gary.
It must be time for Gary.
Gary time.
Thanks, Helen. That was a fantastic input. And you ended off with the thing about good hope. But in the midst of your talk, there was this lovely analogy of the crash landing plane without a pilot and the announcement being made. And I often think of climate change in a similar fashion. But I was just juxtaposing the two. In a crash landing plane, there is no hope of recovery of the plane. The plane is doomed, and it's just, your hope is then focused on that you'll survive the crash, not that you can correct the course of the plane. And I was wondering, just in this thinking about thinking, what were we thinking? What role sort of hope plays in your mind in this impotence, grief, rage cycle?
Well, actually, it was kind of also a little joke about Hello from Cape Town and the Cape of Good Hope. Yeah, part of what didn't make it in here is a concern, and Slavoj Žižek's quite good in his latest book, Too Late to Awaken, about a lot of thinking and planning and interventions related to climate crisis are an excuse not to deal with it, or a way of, like, I think he says, what does he call himself? Some kind of compulsive neurotic. And I'm talking all of this stuff because if I'm quiet, somebody will realize I actually have nothing to say. So the plane crash might be the stuff that, like, why are we up in the air anyways, actually? It's not just a matter of looking up, we're up there. And like, maybe we should get our feet back on the ground. And if I'm substituting Western thinking, and it's Western thinking with scare quotes, because like Western thinking is a political project. If that crashes, that could be a very good thing. And also Hannah Arendt's thing of, we don't know what the future is. So we've got a freedom to act now in the way that feels useful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Helen. Looking in the chat, see if anybody else has any questions. We'll wait and see whether or not they do. If you don't mind, Helen, just one more little thing from me. You in the quotations, there was one that related to what was it now? It was like, I think the concept was radical alterity. This idea of identifying with the other to the point where the identification almost is a oneness, but also at the same time not.
No.
Could you explain a little bit more? Yeah.
The opposite of that.
Okay.
What Levinas is saying is that everything gets reduced to me, and to be in relationship with the other, allowing the other to exist in a way that I'm not going to understand, I'm not going to, is otherwise than me, and that we don't become one, but that there's this kind of weird order in which I am responsible for the life of the other, to not leave the other alone to their death in a way that isn't reciprocal. And Levinas is really complicated. Basically, okay, let me give you my Levinas bit. That when he says that the problem with Western thinking is that it makes the self the center of everything, and everything is reduced to being, and the being that's concerned with its being, and it's death focused, and is a lot like saying that the Earth is the center of the planets. And then somebody comes along and says, no, it's actually us going around the sun, and that's where the center is. And nothing changes in the sky, nothing changes in the world. It's just everything means differently. And it's that kind of it just takes the rug out from under. And we're in the same world, but everything's different. And it makes a lot more sense to me, anyways, not to a lot of people, but.
No, that's great. Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you see Andrea's thing in the chat
Yeah.
that she can't? Okay.
I did. I'm going to take Roger first, and then we'll take Andrea thereafter. Thanks.
No, thanks. I feel bad for Andrea. She put that out a while back. But yeah, thanks for the very dense and well sort of thought through talk, Helen. My initial reaction is just to sit and not respond. I'd love to go back on the recording and just listen to that again. So on the on the not responding bit, it's more a question of something that you just said around Western thinking. I'd be interested to any thoughts you have on how that might crash, particularly with reference to, you know, the kind of great hope of much of the Western world with reference to climate change, which is technology and science, that somehow, you know, we will just have enough progress that all of the issues that we're causing through overconsumption, etc., will kind of magically get solved, a kind of deus ex machina, and we can just keep our current way of life, and hooray, everything's okay. And it kind of seems you're coming with a radically different stance with this, that, you know, if you were going out to do battle with climate change, it would be with a pen and a notebook and some philosophy, which seems radically counterintuitive to the Western technology side. So yeah, just something in that. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thanks. Well, if all these folks doing all these technological fixes and we get to live exactly the way we are, that'd be great. You know, I just don't see it happening. And then what are we left with? We're left with each other, and we're actually fine if we could just sort of calm down and come to our senses and hang out with each other and do the work of grieving and whatever. And I think poetry is probably involved in that somehow. But it isn't, it is, I mean, there needs to be organizing, there needs to be, I'm just not very good at that. This is kind of the thing I get to do, apparently. What did I miss? There was something else. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that whatever the other thing was. Do you
Was it
remember?
around how Western thinking might crash?
Oh, right. I think that there is, I mean, it's a human endeavor that's been going on for centuries. And I'm talking particularly Western thinking as a political project that has justified a whole lot of horror. Western thinking itself, sort of from the Mediterranean, from a whole mix of influences, and not to mention all the human philosophy. I'm rather fond of Taoism, for instance. I find that a lot more useful. So I think there's a falseness, there's a fake news to this notion of hierarchy and domination and noblesse oblige or whatever. I think actually it's doing itself in some sense. I mean, the ruling class used to rule. It used to have a civilizing notion. It used to make beautiful cities. And if you look at the leaders of the UK, of Germany, of France, no, I mean, there's no leadership there. There's no vision there. And all the captains of industry are heading to their yachts or Mars or something. There is no pilot. So it's I don't think it's anything we particularly have to do. I think we could just maybe stand back and laugh at it. That's always fun. But I mean, not to put any more energy into it, not to put any more anger and violence into it, because it feeds off of that. So I don't know. I just think there's probably a lot of people who aren't so well educated and privileged as us who are probably doing a much better job of coping and making a plan and working together. We could maybe take a look there.
I would agree with that. Andrea, please.
No
Sorry.
worries. I only ever want to step in if there's a gap, so it's quite fun. So just a comment and then a question. A comment just related to Roger's question about technology. What if technology became complex, and it became something more like biomimicry? I mean, I have a kind of vague sense of hope, maybe, if you can think of it that way, in that direction. But that's just a comment. It's not a question for Helen, because I mean, it's a tech question, but maybe it's something somebody could think down the line of perhaps exploring for us. Whether there's a hope for how can you say it, a non-dogmatic image of thought way of doing technology that's actually complex and mimics nature. And would that be great, or would that be some horrible thing that we've actually thought of that won't work? But anyway, that's just a comment. What I wanted to ask you, Helen, a little bit more about is fear. You talk quite a lot about grief and rage, but I think there's also a lot of fear involved in resisting and blocking all of the things that you have mentioned that would be wonderful to for us to actually get into. So I'd just like to know a little bit more about why are we so afraid, and where does fear come from, and how do we work with it? I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but I'd be very interested to know if you do. Thanks.
Thanks. Can you leave your camera on? Thank you. It's just so disconcerting when you're about to answer somebody and they go turn into a name.
Sorry, I actually pressed the wrong buttons there, being technologically not great, but yeah.
Okay. but you have hope in technology, so there's that. I think human endeavor, we're like really creative, and if our creativity was connected to our experience and our morality and our responsibility, that would be really interesting, and certainly possible. Like, why not? I think it's just one of the things I think that I wanted to respond earlier is, I think in '94, like South Africa's transition, that there was a notion, and probably within the ANC as well, that everybody was going to get to live like white people, and then it was, well, where's the labor force? Whose labor are you going to be extracting? And then the climate comes on, and what planet are you going to do that? So that would be one thing. We're going to have to, this has been mentioned in previous seminars, that the way we have to change, we are going to be unrecognizable on the other side of, but I'm up for that. But I'm old, so maybe it's easier. The thing about fear, I think, is part of the way Christianity has been propagated. Is, I think there's a huge fear that we're going to have to pay for what we've done. Like, we're all going to hell. And I think that there's a strange twist in that for the people that are kind of the end of worlders, and the preppers are like, bring on the end of the world, which is another opposite to what I think we're doing here. But I've just come across a Bible verse. Things have just fall my way now. It's really lovely. All of these companions and angels keep coming, and I wrestle with them. Metaphorically speaking, of course. But a line that if you're afraid, it's because you're afraid of punishment. Fear and punishment, and the notion of punishment go together. And it's because you're not loving well enough. If your love was perfect, you wouldn't be afraid. So one way to work on lessening fear would be being better lovers and better beloveds, I suppose. God, you can't talk about love in a philosophy seminar, can you?
Yeah, Plato did. A whole symposium on it, of course. Okay.
We should.
Yeah, thanks. So I get the immediate connection between fear and religion, and yeah, I'm going in that direction too. So thank you. Okay. Sorry, Em.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much. And I'm still learning. I'm still processing, Helen. You've taken us all into a deep and provocative space, I think, and I'm really grateful to you. Really grateful for your time. Thank you so much. I don't think there's anybody else who has a raised hand. Please shout in. You know how terrible I am with this technology stuff. If I've missed anybody.
There's
here we go.
From Roger on the text. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll ask it again.
Thank you.
So that we can end on a lovely provocative note, which is, let me read my question. What are the key takeaways here for the ANC if they wanted to engage with the ideas here? I mean, you opened with their document from '94 and mentioned a bit about the future, but yeah, if they in good faith wanted to engage with some of this, what would that look like?
I'm picturing a nice suite for me in the president's office. How's that?
Philosopher to the president.
Why not? Why not? God, that's just what we need. I don't know. This isn't a particular practical thing. This, like, what I'm presenting is kind of acknowledging insoluble problems. If I were a politician, I would have to be trying to deal with it. It's such a mess. And I know for sure, like, there's people trying to do good things. And I think I even remember back in during Mandela's presidency, the press does their thing of telling the truth, but but it was pounding on all of the stuff that was going wrong, and the people that were actually doing a good job, like the amount of legislation that first parliament put out was astonishing. But I don't even want to get into all the complications and all of the just all of the variables right now. I don't know. I don't know. I think they try and keep the ship afloat until the next thing comes along. And I think saying that out loud, I can imagine that would kind of be what Ramaphosa's doing. And Ramaphosa sort of standing in there for senior leadership that actually know where they come from and what they stand for, even if conditions now have taken a lot of possibility away. And, you know, it's hard to know what, I think we're back to who do we get? We're not going back to who do we get to blame. But yeah, I think keeping the ship afloat until maybe it's the next generation comes on, or maybe, oh, did this not make it into it? Like, we really need a nonviolent, popular, mass democratic movement. The UDF was beautiful back in the day in really, really hard conditions. People have to get involved, have to get organized. It has to be, because that's where the political power that can stand against the corruption and call it out has to be there. And there's signs of it elsewhere in the world. I don't much see it here. So for the ANC, I mean, it's hard to, there isn't an ANC. But for the next move of the South African freedom struggle, what would the takeaways be? Is probably a more expansive question, to which I also don't know the answer. But I'll give you a better question instead.
As you promised in your overview that was sent out, so thank you.
I think we're kind of running out of time again. So, Em, if you have any burning kind of closing remarks.
No, I think as has been the case with every single seminar presentation this series, we just keep delving deeper into these pertinent questions, and I think we have a responsibility to do it, and I think let's keep doing it. Lots to chew on, lots to think about, and again, extend my sincere thanks, Helen, for your sharing with us not just your brain but also your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Yeah, and philosophical wisdom. It is philosophy.
Yes.
It's definitely, truly philosophy.
Yeah, real kind.
And there is YouTube, you know, so you can look again. A lot of, I think I'm with Em there was just so much in the presentation that it was quite difficult to take it all in. There was that sense of, okay, I need to go back to this thinking and that idea and actually chew over it a bit more. So that's why we have the YouTube videos. So you're all welcome to go back and to distribute them widely. So yes, thank you very, very much, Helen. It was wonderful. And next week we have a break so to allow you all to get involved in our political activity. But we do have voting week next week, so we won't have a seminar next week. But the week after that, Roger will be speaking to us about moving towards sustainability. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And yeah, thank you all. Wonderful presentation.